The coffee was still hot when I read the message. I set the mug down slowly, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped trusting themselves. Then I opened my laptop and I started making calls. That was a Tuesday morning in October. By Friday, my son had nothing left in his name. I need to go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. And I want it to make sense. I want you to understand exactly what happened and why I did what I did, because I am not a cruel man. I was a father. I was a patient man. I was, for a very long time, a fool. My name does not matter. What matters is that I spent 41 years building something. I started with a single landscaping truck, a used one, with a transmission that slipped in third gear and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. I drove that truck through winters that froze your fingers to the wheel. I drove it through summers that turned asphalt soft under your boots. I built a crew of 3 into a company of 60, commercial contracts, municipal work, a reputation in this county that took decades to earn. I did not inherit any of it. I did not marry into it. I built it the way most men of my generation built things, quietly, stubbornly, without asking anyone for permission. My wife, Margaret, stood beside me through every year of it. She kept the books when we could not afford a bookkeeper. She answered phones when we could not afford a receptionist. She raised our son, Derek, in a house that was modest at first and comfortable later, and she made sure he understood where the comfort came from. She told him about the truck. She told him about the winters. She made him understand that what we had was not luck. It was accumulated sacrifice, and it belonged to our family. Margaret passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I will not dwell on that except to say that her absence left a silence in this house that I have never fully learned to live inside. Derek was 34 when she died. He cried at the funeral the way you cry when you are performing grief for an audience. I noticed that, but I told myself I was being uncharitable. Grief comes out in strange ways. I told myself that for a long time. Derek had joined the company 8 years before Margaret died. He came in as an operations manager, which was a title I gave him that was generous relative to his experience. But he was my son, and I wanted him to learn. And I wanted to believe that one day he would love the business the way I loved it. He had the intelligence for it. What he lacked, I could not have named then. I can name it now. He lacked the willingness to be uncomfortable. Every hard thing, he found a way around. Every difficult conversation, he redirected or delayed. He was good at the surface of things, presentations, client dinners, the vocabulary of competence, but underneath the surface, he was always looking for the easier path. He married a woman named Cassandra 3 years after Margaret passed. She was attractive and well-spoken, and within 6 months of the wedding I understood that she was the one driving the car. Derek deferred to her on everything. At first I thought it was affection, then I thought it was habit. Eventually, I understood it was something else, a complete and quiet surrender of his own judgment to hers, which would have been a private matter between a husband and wife if she had not very quickly turned her attention to my company. She began attending meetings she had not been invited to. She began offering opinions about personnel decisions and contract strategy and capital allocation. I was polite. I redirected. She pushed back with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and Derek sat beside her and said nothing. This became the rhythm of things. She advanced. He said nothing. I held my ground. She advanced again. In the 3rd year of their marriage, Derek came to me with a proposal. He wanted me to formally transition leadership of the company to him. Not a plan for transition and immediate transfer. He had documents prepared. The language in those documents, I recognized immediately, was not his. He did not have the legal vocabulary for it. I asked him directly, "Did Cassandra write this?" He told me it was something they had worked on together. I asked him again. He looked at the table. I told him I would consider it. I did not tell him what I was actually thinking, which was that I had just watched my son lie to my face about something that affected my life's work, and that he had done it calmly, with prepared documents, in my own kitchen. I poured us both coffee afterward. I asked about my grandchildren. They had 2, a boy and a girl, both under 5. I listened to him talk about them. I watched his face relax as the subject changed. He thought the conversation had gone well. I began paying closer attention after that. What I noticed over the following months was methodical, and it was patient. and it was not the work of someone acting impulsively. Cassandra had been talking to key employees, not ordering them, not threatening talking, asking questions that planted doubts. Was the company growing as fast as it could? Were decisions being made with enough input? Was leadership, meaning me, keeping up with the industry? She was building a narrative. She was building it slowly, the way you build a fire in wet wood, with small pieces and a great deal of patience. By the time I understood what she was constructing, she had been building it for over a year. I brought in someone I trusted, my operations manager of 20 years, a man named Gerald, who had been with me since the truck with the bad transmission, and I asked him plainly what he was hearing. Gerald is not a man who enjoys delivering bad news. He took his time. Then he told me that there was a conversation among the senior staff that I might be losing my edge. That Derek had mentioned, more than once, that he was concerned about my decision-making, that there had been talk about a possible restructuring of authority. I thanked Gerald. I told him to keep it to himself. I went home, and I sat in Margaret's chair. I never sit in it. But I sat in it that night, and I thought for a very long time. I did not confront Derek. I did not confront Cassandra. Instead, I made an appointment with my attorney, a woman I had worked with for 15 years named Patricia, and I told her everything. Then I told her what I wanted to do, and I asked her if it was possible. She told me it would take time, and it would take documentation, and it would require absolute discretion. I told her I had all three. We began. Over the next several months, I reorganized the ownership structure of the company quietly and legally, in ways that required no announcement and no signature from Derek. He held a minority stake, 12%, that I had gifted him years ago, believing then that it was an investment in our future together. The rest remained entirely mine. I began the process of identifying a buyer for the business, a regional firm that had approached me twice before and been told I was not ready. I called them and told them I was ready now. We began preliminary conversations under strict confidentiality. I also began looking at the house. Derek and Cassandra lived in a house on Millbrook Road that I had purchased 7 years ago, after Margaret died, because I did not want my son to be burdened with a mortgage during a difficult period. I bought it outright. The title was in my name. Derek had always spoken of it casually as our house, and I had allowed that casual language to continue without correcting it, because at the time it had seemed harmless. It was not, as it turned out, harmless. It was information that had been quietly stored and factored into someone's calculations about what they were eventually owed. The family reunion that year was held at the Carver County Fairgrounds Pavilion, the way it had been held every August for as long as I could remember. My sister organized it. About 40 people came, cousins, their children, a few friends who had become family over the decades. It was the kind of event that Margaret had loved, and attending it without her still required something from me that I could not have named. Derek and Cassandra arrived late. They arrived the way people arrive when they want to be noticed, arriving unhurried, composed, with the children dressed carefully. Cassandra moved through the crowd with the particular ease of someone who has decided that a room belongs to them. After the meal, Derek stood up. He did not ask. He did not announce. He simply stood and tapped his glass, and the table went quiet, and he began to speak. What he said was framed as tribute. He said he wanted to honor everything his father had built. He used words like legacy and transition and the natural order of things. He said that every great builder eventually reaches a point where the wisest thing he can do is step back and trust the next generation. He said he had spent years preparing for this moment. He said he hoped that the people who loved his father would support what was coming next, because it was the best thing. He paused here, and he looked directly at me for everyone. The table was quiet. Some people were smiling uncertainly. Some people were looking at me. I looked back at my son. I looked at him the way you look at something you have been studying for a long time and have finally finished studying. I said, calmly, that I appreciated the kind words. Then I picked up my fork and continued eating. Derek sat down. Cassandra's smile did not move. The moment passed, and the conversation resumed. And to any outside observer it might have looked like nothing significant had happened. But something significant had happened. My son had just stood in front of our family and announced, in language designed to sound loving, that he intended to take my company. He had done it publicly, so that I would feel the pressure of witnesses. He had done it at a family gathering, so that refusal would look like stubbornness or ego. He had done it carefully, so that I could not call it what it was without seeming paranoid. He had underestimated me. I drove home that evening with my windows down, the August air warm and smelling of cut grass, and the particular sweetness of late summer in this part of the country. I thought about the truck. I thought about Margaret. I thought about 41 winters and the kind of patience that 41 winters teaches a man who is paying attention. I called Patricia the next morning. The sale of the business closed 11 weeks later. The buyer was fair, and the process was handled with complete confidentiality until the day the paperwork was signed. I kept Gerald on through the transition. The rest of the staff was well treated, and most were retained. I received a number that I will not disclose, except to say that it was larger than Derek had ever understood the business to be worth, because he had never done the work of understanding it fully. He knew the surface. He did not know the structure. On the same morning the sale closed, Patricia filed the paperwork reclaiming the house on Millbrook Road. The legal process had been initiated months earlier, quietly, and the documentation was clean. Derek had never had titel. He had been a resident at my discretion. That discretion was now withdrawn. I did not call him. I did not write a letter, or send a message, or arrange a conversation. I had tried conversations. I had tried patience and generosity, and the assumption of good faith, and every other instrument available to a man who wants to believe that his son is still reachable. I was done with instruments. The first he heard of any of it was when his attorney called him. That, I am told, was a Tuesday. There is a moment in every version of this kind of story where the person hearing it asks, "Were you not worried about your grandchildren?" And the answer is yes, I thought about them. I thought about them seriously and carefully. They were 5 and 3 and they had not chosen their parents. I had been building something for them for years that had nothing to do with Derek accounts in their names. An educational trust, arrangements that were entirely separate from anything Derek or Cassandra could access or influence. That was not an afterthought. That was a deliberate structure I had put in place the year after Margaret died, because even then something in me was paying attention to things I could not yet articulate. My grandchildren will be fine. My grandchildren will have more than their parents tried to take. What happened after that Tuesday is not something I experienced directly, because I was not there. I know it from Gerald, who heard it from someone who was present. Derek went to the office, which by then was no longer an office he had any standing to enter. He was met at the door. He asked to speak to someone in authority. He was told, politely, that the transition was complete and that he should direct any concerns to the new ownership's legal team. He stood in the parking lot for some time. Then he got in his car and drove away. I was in a hotel in Asheville, North Carolina when I heard this. I had booked 3 weeks there, in the mountains, in a room with a long window facing west. I had a book I had been meaning to read for years. I had coffee in the morning and wine in the evenings, and I walked a different trail every afternoon. And for the first time in longer than I could accurately measure, I slept through the night. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think honesty is owed here. I did not feel triumphant. I have heard people talk about revenge as something that satisfies, something that releases, and I want to tell you that in my experience it is quieter than that. What I felt, mostly, was tired. I felt the kind of tired that comes after you have been holding something heavy for a very long time, and you have finally set it down. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just the absence of weight. I also felt something I had not expected, which was grief. Not for Derek as he had become, but for the version of Derek that had existed before all of this, the boy who used to ride in the passenger seat of the truck with me on Saturday mornings, asking questions about the jobs, pointing at equipment, asking me how things worked. I do not know when that boy became the man who stood at the family table and announced his intentions in the language of tribute. I do not know if there was a single moment or a long erosion. I have thought about it, and I have not been able to find the answer. And I have reached a point where I understand that I will not find it, and that is something I have to carry. Margaret would have said, "You did what you could." She would have said it without sentimentality, the way she said most true things plainly. Standing still, looking directly at you, she would have been right. I stayed in Asheville for 3 weeks. Then I drove north, slowly, taking routes I had never taken, stopping in towns I had never stopped in. I ate at diners and I talked to strangers and I thought about what the next years would look like, Now that there was no company to run and no battle to fight and no sun to wait for, I thought about it without dread, which surprised me. I had expected dread. Instead, there was something that resembled, cautiously and tentatively, possibility. I am not telling you that everything is resolved. Derek has not called me. I have not called him. Whether that ever changes is something I cannot answer. I know only that I did not make the choice I made out of anger, or spite, or wounded pride. I made it out of something much simpler. I had spent 41 years building something, and I was not going to allow it to be taken, not by a stranger, not by my own son, not by anyone. There are people who will tell you that family is family, regardless, that you endure whatever family asks of you because the alternative is being alone. I understand why people believe this. I believed it myself, for years, and the belief cost me more than I can accurately calculate. What I know now is that family is not a blank check. Love is not a blank check. There are things that cannot be undone by biology, and standing in front of 40 people and announcing that you intend to take everything your father built is one of those things. I still have the photograph from that last reunion. I have it because my sister sent it to me, not knowing what had happened, just sending photos the way she always does, with a short note. In the photograph, I am sitting at the long table, and Derek is standing at the end of it, glass in hand, mid-sentence. I am looking at him. I am not smiling, but I do not look angry. I look like what I was, a man who has been paying attention for a very long time and has finally finished deciding. I keep it in the drawer of the nightstand. I do not look at it often, but I have not thrown it away either. And I think about why that is. Sometimes, in the early mornings when the house is quiet and the coffee is still brewing and there is nothing yet requiring a decision, I think I keep it because it is true, because it happened, because 41 years of work and one long Tuesday morning both happened, and both are part of the same life, and a man should be able to look at his own life without flinching. I have always believed that. I still do.